Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. First time for a week. Sorry, there's been a little bit of a break. It was a mad week. Last week I went to Hull City to visit Liam Rosenior and Jean-Michel Seri at their training ground to discuss their season. That was on the Guardian website now, if you want to check that out. I'm here to look back at Newcastle United's 4-1 defeat at Arsenal yesterday. It was a really poor game for Newcastle and a really poor performance and a really poor result. It would be harsh to say that people expected a result because Arsenal have been in such great form recently, particularly scoring loads and loads of goals in recent Premier League games, but their defeat against Porto in the Champions League this week sort of maybe showed a little bit of a blueprint about how Newcastle could disrupt their rhythm and do what they did last year at the Emirates when they drew 0-0 in January of 2023, when they went there and really frustrated Arsenal. And there seemed to be a bit of bad blood that transcended back into the game at St James's Park earlier in the season, obviously with the goal that Arsenal fans believe shouldn't have stood, and possibly that Bruno should have been sent off and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of bad blood going into the game. So that you would have sensed that there was an opportunity for Newcastle to upset Arsenal's rhythm, to really push Arsenal's buttons, but that just never happened. From the very start, Arsenal were on it. They were intense. They did what Newcastle often have done recently to teams at St James's Park up until the last few weeks, and really forced them into submission. And that was kind of how it was. And it was sort of 17 minutes to the first goal, 25 I think to the second, 2-0 down, and Newcastle had no way back. They were better in the second half a little bit. There was more of a link up to Alexander Isak, who was back for the first time from his injury, but may as well not have been because he didn't get a touch in the first half. Anthony Gordon was a little bit more lively in the second half as well. Bruno had a bit more of an impact. But that first half just set the tone and Newcastle didn't really recover from it. As I say, you've got to credit Arsenal. They were on it. They've really looked like they're in the title race, and Mikel Arteta's done a fantastic job there. There's no way you can really criticise them for the way that they've played recently, and the way they bounced back from the defeat in Portugal this week was really impressive. Declan Rice, I thought, was a key player in midfield because Jorginho came in and played deeper. It allowed Rice to press high up against Bruno and really shut Newcastle down from there, because if you stop Bruno, particularly away from home, you really stop Newcastle. That's kind of the way it's been for weeks. So I think the frustrating thing about this game, and we'll get into the goals and the details in a little bit, but I think the frustrating thing for me in this game is how ominous it felt. Coming into it, you sensed that Newcastle were going to struggle because even though they'd won the last 4 games in a row away from home, they're defensively, they're shocking. They've conceded so many goals in recent games, 4 on a few occasions, 3 on more occasions as well. They just look so open and they look so passive. They don't have all of the hallmarks that made them so good. They're not aggressive. They're not Eddie Howe's shithouse mags. They're not that anymore. They looked passive. They looked easy to break through. Sven Botman and Fabian Schär were poor on the ball. And Loris Karius, who came in for the Dubravka, played the ball out to them, as has been the case under Eddie Howe. They didn't have anywhere to go, so the high press from Arsenal just counteracted them. It was just everything that they did played into Arsenal's hands. When Newcastle are at their best, they play with a high line, they play with energy, they play with high press, they go after teams, they make them uncomfortable, and they're still trying to do the high press, and they're still trying to be open, they're still trying to push high and attack, but they don't have the energy, and they don't have the aggression, and they don't have the bite, and that's what really makes that successful. So what ends up happening is the openness becomes a weakness because teams can just break through them because they're too soft. This has been something I've said on this channel for weeks. This has been something everyone's said for weeks. And the same things that happened against Luton, that happened at times against Nottingham Forest away, certainly Nottingham Forest at home, happened against Bournemouth last week as well. And in so many other games, Tottenham, Liverpool, Everton in that December run as well, they all happened again, but with some of the best players in the country. And that was the reason why Newcastle got so heavily punished yesterday. As I say, really, you've got to credit Arsenal. They knew where Newcastle's weaknesses were and exploited them from the first minute. Newcastle just didn't do enough to react to that. They should have probably changed system with thinking back to it and gone 3 at the back. Obviously, they kept the same formation. There was a couple of changes. Dan Burn came out for Tino Livramento. I expected Livramento to come in, but I didn't think that Burn would come out. I thought he would go to a back 3 as that ended against Aston Villa, because the funny thing is that sort of felt like the blueprint for these big away games. You sit tight with a back 5 and you press and you do well in midfield, and you then break on the counter with pace from Almiron, Gordon and Isak. Newcastle weren't able to settle into that rhythm because Arsenal went after them. But I think that was partly to do with the system that Eddie Howe played. It was 4 at the back, the same system, just different personnel. Livramento came in for Byrne. Barnes was on the bench. Isak started, which was a bit of a risk. Obviously, it was great that he didn't get injured, which was a bit of a fear for people because that's happened against Villa and it's happened against Dortmund when he came back a bit too early. And there's a sense that he hasn't got this groin problem under control. And obviously, as I mentioned, Karius came in for Dubravka earlier. So the system was the same. The openness was the same. You could credit Eddie Howe for seeing the issue that Byrne was going to get exposed and tried to sort that with Livramento, but it just didn't really help because Arsenal had Newcastle's number all the way through. The first goal was a calamity of an own goal. I think it was by Botman, who had one of his poorest games that I've seen in a Newcastle shirt. The second goal was poor marking as well with an easy finish. And then the other 2 goals in the second half, I think by that point it was just too late. The positive for Newcastle is that Joe Willock was back on the bench. And the way I want to end this video is to really say that there is something to cling on to for Newcastle, because as soon as Willock came off the bench, he showed what he could offer. Newcastle were able to look forward. They were able to break the lines. They looked like they had structure. They looked like they had plan. They looked like they had cohesion again. And that was all because Willock came on the pitch. He scored the goal that was ultimately a consolation. But I think going forward, that's going to be a massive, massive thing for Newcastle, that he's back in the fold. And if he can stay fit, there's obvious problems because he came back and, like Isak, came back and then went out again. And he's only played a handful of games this season. But if he can stay fit, then Newcastle can build from that, because he is the reason why Newcastle lack the energy in midfield. He's the reason why there's such a desperation, why everything's so desperate, because Eddie Howe has been asking Sean Longstaff and Louis Miley to play with energy and high press and intensity. It's not their game. They're more sort of keeping things ticking along, good passing, good positional play. So that's why it looks so good against Aston Villa, because the midfield played to their strengths. They didn't do that yesterday against Arsenal. As I say, though, it was too late from the moment. From minute 1, it looked like this game was going to go the way it did. Newcastle now have lost 11 games this season, as many as they've won. They're currently 8th, but West Ham play tomorrow and could go above them. They play Brentford. European football looks like a bit of a long shot. I still think if there's still enough there to go on this winning run that can keep them in there, but it looks like this season is becoming a bit of a difficult one to save. The FA Cup on Tuesday against Blackburn is absolutely crucial now. If they win that game, then there's still something to go for. If they lose, you're looking at just a handful of highlights and trying to end the season on a high to try and build momentum for the summer. Eddie Howe's already admitted that they're looking at the summer already, which kind of shows you the realism that they've taken in terms of their approach to this season as well. And obviously the Dan Ashworth situation's got to rumble on in the background. We've got to hope that is solved and that he leaves and Newcastle can bring in somebody else to replace him. But the game against Blackburn is now really, really interesting to see how fans react if there's a defeat there. It sort of seems like the pressure is not, I wouldn't say it's turning on Eddie Howe. I wouldn't say fans are demanding that he leaves or demanding that he is sacked or anything like that. But I think there's a sense that just complete disregard of the whole conversation has gone that we had in December. When it was mentioned that Eddie Howe could be under pressure, people just dismissed it straight away. Now it's kind of like, well, if he doesn't turn it round and the game against Blackburn is the best way to do that, then we'll see where it goes. I think there's a long way to run with Eddie Howe at the helm. I think he can still turn it round. I think he deserves the opportunity to turn it round, and I think he'll get that opportunity. But the game against Blackburn is absolutely crucial. I'll be back tomorrow to look ahead to that one in more detail. Thank you very much for joining me. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then. Cheers.